While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust, and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net, Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. When talking to the experts and leading authorities that have participated in the 140 plus episodes of Security Breach, there's always a slight pause when directing their attention specifically to the industrial sector. That's because, well, we're special. There's the unique juxtaposition of old and bleeding-edge technology. There's the influx of greater connectivity combating the struggles to identify and secure the growing number of endpoints. And there are the ongoing battles related to secure by design responsibilities, cloud networks, and the ever-popular building and breaking down of IT and OT silos. I mean, let's be real, that's a lot. And all of these complex elements play a part in the escalating number of attacks on manufacturing and critical infrastructure. The good news is we're getting better. Better at identifying the problems and better at elevating solutions from some of the sharpest minds in the sector. And we're fortunate to be able to share these insights from an incredible collective on today's episode. First, let's hear from Max Clausen. He's the Senior VP of Network Connectivity at Zayo as he delves into secure by design challenges and some of the network improvements facing the industrial sector. Another trend I'd like to throw your way and just kind of get your take on it. It's so big in the industrial sector is this the thought of this whole secure by design dynamic in terms of we've got a lot of legacy equipment that's been put in place. And we're trying to connect a lot of new technology to it. Security sometimes gets caught in the midst between the manufacturer thinking the supplier is providing it and the supplier feeling it's more of a manufacturer type of problem. What's been your experience in sort of trying to bridge that gap a little bit and making sure everything is good when we start connecting all this legacy stuff to the new stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So we're in the business of connecting all sorts of endpoints, and we sell the piece parts for our customers to knit together the package of both connectivity and protection that they need. And so depending on what that combination looks like, we'll come up with a different solution. And we may only be a part of that solution. So really it comes back to the customer and how they want to approach it and what vendors they want to incorporate and how much they want to push on a single vendor versus having distributed across a whole range of vendors. So we see a really broad range of approaches, some more successful than others. But certainly we're eager and able to provide as much or as little as customers want us to.
Are there any questions that you would recommend a manufacturer asking their supplier in terms of when they're making some of these connections and bringing in some of this new technology, just at the very base level to make sure that they're at least putting the right foot forward or putting the right steps in place to make sure they have this secure by design dynamic in place?
Sure. I think one is just understanding what the connectivity elements are and how they could be protected and where the vulnerabilities are in the connectivity. The hardware vendors will certainly be able to speak to vulnerabilities in the hardware elements that are being distributed out into the network. But for us and for the networking elements, really thinking about the difference between public versus private network connectivity and how you protect both of those things and what the relative vulnerabilities are. I think those are all really important discussions to have and can lead customers to making different decisions about how they want to deploy their network.
Absolutely. Over time, you can go back as far as you want to, or maybe more recently, whatever makes sense. What do you think have been some of the biggest, whether it's from a technological perspective, a strategic perspective, whatever the case is, what do you think have been some of the things that have made the biggest impact in network connectivity in terms of understanding the security of it, getting better at it, or things that we've missed along the way?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest trend is clearly the move to the cloud, and more things being uh, on the internet, traversing the internet at some point in their journey, and more companies and individuals leveraging internet connectivity to do their daily job. I think if you rewind, 5 or 10 years ago, that was not really the case. That you were much more likely to be using a corporate network that was secured, and now with sort of distributed workforce, hybrid workforce, transitions to the cloud, most of that data is at some point traversing the internet. And so thinking about how you secure that is a new world. That's very different from securing kind of a defined set of 20 locations. It's now you're thinking about how do you secure your data effectively in the entire internet. So different discussion, different evolution.
Yeah.
Always interesting.
Well, and that leads to a question. I know this is very open-ended, very vague, but are you seeing a lot of enterprises just being overly connected? Are we too exposed to the internet? Do we have too many connection points, too many endpoints right now?
I'm sure there are people that would argue that we do, but I think that's the nature of the world that we live in, and certainly I wouldn't expect that the trends that we've seen over the past few years will abate. I mean, I generally would expect that the number of endpoints will continue to expand. We'll need to get continually more clever about how we protect them.
Now offering insight on breaking down those IT/OT silos and weaving through patching challenges is John Karse. He's the field CISO at SquareX. Now, I think you nailed it there. I mean, downtime is just so difficult in manufacturing and even other critical infrastructure. And when it comes to those patching, that's what you're talking about, taking systems offline to install those patches. What are some of the things that you've seen enterprises do to effectively handle some of that patch management?
Well, and with respect to patch management, I think, making sure that you have ways of, two things. One, I think being able to defend in place, right? Regardless of the fact that you have a system that's not patchable. Hopefully, if it's connected on the network or you have communication protocols that you're watching, that you can patch, on the wire, right? So for example, if you had like a log4j vulnerability in a system, can you patch it on the wire so that if someone tried to effectuate an attack on that system, you could block it on the wire instead of, on the system? It's probably a good mitigation. I think another good thing to have in place is have redundant systems that are available, so that if you're updating one, you can update them like blue-green style. That's what we would do in a data center, right? I was a contractor support in the Navy, so I was never in the military,
Okay.
right? So,
Okay.
but I supported OCONUS, which is our outside continental U.S. naval network, and I was. But definitely, I've seen some interesting stories there. But I mean, some of them are very much like ICS kind of problems where, just patching a system could take a missile loader offline, right? Where, you want to be able to load missiles and bombs and artillery onto a ship. And by patching a system and this is a long time ago, so I'm sure they're not using Java to run all this stuff anymore. Who knows?
Yeah.
But
Let's hope not.
That's what not. But those kinds of problems were very surprising to me when, early in my cybersecurity career. I mean, this is like, 2003, 2005 kind of time frames.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest issues too that we talk about in the industrial sector is now that we're focused on these things that are taking place on the plant floor and the different connectivities. Before that was always an IT thing. Over here you had OT. Now we know how to break all that down and start working together. You've been doing this a little bit, John. How are we doing in terms of getting those folks in the same room and talking to each other? Is it getting better or is it still a big struggle?
I think it's still a struggle. I think that that there's and I don't know if there should be a struggle, but I think there is still a struggle because the folks in ICS are really worried about availability. That's their prime uh, seems to be the prime thing that they're thinking about, which is important. As a CISO, I'm worried about data compromise, data breaches on one hand, right? Stop those from happening, but availability on the other side. So it's something that's very important for us to keep systems up and running, um, all the time. I think normally what I see is that, the technology folks are really good at maintaining availability, but securing the systems, maybe not so great. They're going to get the system up and running, but what's it take to actually secure it? I think that becomes challenging for folks in the IT and OT spaces. And it happens in the IT space all the time as well, where there's a apprehension to include security controls into a system because of fears of latency or blocking something that's legitimate. And those kinds of challenges are people fall back by removing security controls. And it's happened to me many, many times in environments where we have an e-commerce system that has some piece of equipment that's online, and then something happens. The first thing we start to do is scale back the security to see if it's security causing the problem. And that's happened to me on the OT side as well, where we've introduced new technologies to secure the network paths and between the different systems. But if there is a problem, it's like, can we determine what it is and take the appropriate steps to both back off security measures and then put them back on?
Now, you make a great point. That's something we haven't talked a lot about on the show, is sort of overcompensating for some of that stuff coming in. We don't know how to secure it or how to filter it appropriately, so we just block it. We just cut it off. And I think that leads to a lot of anxiety in terms of not taking as much time as we should to implement some of these strategies for cybersecurity, and maybe not training our people the way we need to in detecting some of these attacks as well. What's been your experience there, and maybe what's the most effective way to not take that shortcut, if you will?
Well, I think it's mutual understanding and understanding each other's language, right? Yeah. I think that when you're in these spaces and you're talking about security, I think we tend to speak a lot about physical security with respect to ICS and how do we, keep the system safe physically. When we start talking about network security and cybersecurity in general practices, I think we tend to lean on models that are not well understood by OT folks. Like, for example, we don't speak a lot in terms of Purdue models and what that actually is. But if you look at how we practice IT security and how we practice cyber in different spaces, the Purdue model isn't really that dissimilar from what we do with GSMA or other models that we bring to securing IT systems. I think that what happens is, because we're on the IT side, when we have a bad day, it's, a system went down and you didn't have any transactions processing for a few hours that, for sales, it's a sales problem, right? When we talk about OT security and OT failures, we could be dealing with loss of life or folks not having, access to 911 or other kinds of systems that are necessary for us to preserve life, right? So it's a different kind of the impact to having a down system is different. And I'm not sure that IT folks really, they don't really get it, right? And because they're not dealing with life and limb in general day-to-day, worrying about an email server being up or down. When you have a OT system go down, you could be contaminating water supplies or, changing the, temperatures in a hospital. There's lots of different kinds of impacts that could be happening that we don't think of as, on the IT side, is those are bad days. Those would be really bad days for an IT guy. I mean, just terrible bad days. But for OT guys, it's a little bit more real. And I think that's where the disconnect is trying to make sure that the IT folks who have lots of experience in designing resilient systems lots of experience. Cybersecurity and IT have lots of experience in defending systems, but making sure that we know how to test those systems in OT and make sure that we're not negatively impacting a system or even erring on the side of detection capabilities versus preventative capabilities. Like, don't block the protocol from running if it has a different command set in it. Those are the this is not just a help desk call and you're saying, hey, I can't connect to this website anymore. It could lead to a big impact on the manufacturing floor and your other critical infrastructure systems.
No, I couldn't agree more. And it is trying to figure out a language between those two groups. You're absolutely right. Next, it's Sophos' Chester Wisniewski as he tackles some of the complexities impacting endpoints, visibility, and remote monitoring. One of the things we talked a lot about at the RSA conference was XDR. That's kind of a new thing that you guys are, not a new thing, but something that you guys have a lot of focus on with the extended detection response. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that, how it's becoming more important and why we needed to sort of graduate and take this next step with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think most folks are familiar with endpoint detection and response, where you get much deeper instrumentation into what's happening on typically your Windows endpoint computers, but extending into Mac and Linux and other platforms as well now. What extended detection and response brings to the table is more of a all-encompassing view of what's going on in the network and not just endpoints, right? So you typically in extended detection and response will also have instrumentation into your cloud applications, into your network stuff, which, in many environments is a firewall, but also we're starting to see more, NDR things too, network detection and response tools out there. So to really tell what's going on in an incident, it's really important to have visibility from all those different layers, right? Because any given one of them may be compromised. And so you might have reliable indications coming from the network and unreliable things happening perhaps on an endpoint if it's been already compromised. And so it's kind of getting a three-dimensional view of what's happening rather than a single layer.
And that makes a ton of sense, but I can already feel some frustration from some folks going out there going, man, I'm struggling enough just to see and have visibility on all of my endpoints and assets. Now you're telling me that there's different layers of this stuff that I also need to be monitoring. Can you help clarify that a little bit in terms of why that's important and why it's not necessarily, adding on, but just offering more depth is really what we're talking about?
Absolutely. And it's doing it in one place is the key. Right now, you've got one view of everything that's happening in an endpoint, and then you have to go into a firewall interface somewhere and try to figure out where's this network traffic going, or where's it coming from, or what's it trying to do. And you're doing this in several different tools, which means then you're having to log it some third place to try to keep track of all these different indicators that are happening while you're maybe responding to an incident or doing a threat hunt. And the goal of XDR is to bring it into one spot so that you can pivot from one piece of information to the next, all inside of one interface. So when you're on that endpoint that you fear may be compromised and you're like, what's this IP it's talking to? You can pivot to that IP and see all the data from the network tools right there in the same spot to determine, is that a command and control interface or is it just getting a Windows update? Right now you have to, or without XDR, typically you're going to have to go into 3 or 4 different tools to try to paste together this picture. And the goal here is to make it so it's in one tool. You take logs and notes in one spot, and you can pivot between the different pieces of information you already have.
Well, it seems to me like this would be a real key tool to have, especially in manufacturing, when you're dealing with a lot of these dwelling attacks where we don't know, once we supposedly kick the bad guys out, if they're actually out. Seems like having these types of capabilities could maybe help in those applications as well.
Oh, of course. And unfortunately, in industrial environments, there's often things that are not able to be managed. So having that, you may pick up the first indicator something bad is happening from something that is managed. But now you've got to determine, are there other things on the network that also may be talking to this threat actor's IP address, for example? Because I'm not an expert in industrial security, but in the experience I do have, it's often closed platforms, and even if they're running Windows, they may not allow you to install deep instrumentation on the device that's controlling a valve or a machine of some sort directly. So you kind of have to get more of a holistic view from other things on the network and then, pivot to determine whether those devices may be impacted.
Makes sense. One of the things that you mentioned a couple times is remote monitoring and some of the challenges that it can present. And a lot of times you've mentioned it as well in our conversations, it's sort of the origin for a lot of cybersecurity issues within the OT network. Talk to us a little bit there. What are some strategies, some tactics, or some tools, approaches, whatever you want to say, that maybe can help manufacturers better manage a lot of that remote access? Because it's really an ingrained part of our operation right now.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's certainly been something that most OT networks have actively embraced because it means you
Yeah.
don't have to physically drive around trying to go to all these sites and locations to try to
Yeah.
manage stuff, which is a huge productivity benefit for the folks responsible for managing that stuff. And even in our active adversary report, which is, across all industries, almost half of breaches start with some sort of remote access device that either isn't patched or has had credentials compromised. So this is a primary method for attacking a network. And and really it comes back to those two things, which is patching and how we handle authentication. Making sure those devices are patched quickly. Unfortunately, many of them have had lots of vulnerabilities in the news the past year that, I mean, we're recording this at the end of July, and like I think back to January and I'm like, probably hundreds of vulnerabilities in Citrix NetScaler and VPNs and all kinds of different remote access tools and devices that are used to provide that access. So the patching is really, really important, but also it's the lack of multi-factor authentication or what I would call true multi-factor authentication. Unfortunately, a lot of us have gotten accustomed to this idea that we can get a 6-digit code from an SMS message, or we get a 6-digit code from an app on our phone and we enter that in as a multi-factor. But if you're strictly thinking as a security person, that's actually not a second factor, right? It's something plus something else for 30 seconds.
Sure.
And that means if I'm being tricked or I've somehow compromised or phished you, you're going to provide it to me because you provided me your password already. And you went, oh, now you need the 6 digits, and you just hand it over. And that means you've negated that as a second factor entirely. Now, if that's all you have, it's a heck of a lot better than just having a password, which is where most of the breaches we see. But we have seen a migration the last, I would say, 6 to 9 months, where more and more threat actors are able to compromise and phish those 6-digit codes as well. That used to be kind of the stuff we only saw nation states taking note of, and now it's becoming table stakes for many criminal groups to be able to phish those 6-digit codes as well. So moving to either some sort of token-based authentication, like you might have with a USB token on your keychain kind of thing, or a Bluetooth token, or passkeys, which are built into all of our Android and iPhones now, are really phishing resistant. We call them. They're almost phishing proof, but we'll stick with phishing resistant. And that makes an enormous difference. So if you can move in that direction, you're going to be a lot more secure. And in OT networks in particular, as we're seeing more and more threat actors considering a lot of these things to be critical national infrastructure, you have nation states and criminals coming after you. So this is pretty much table stakes to require multi-factor on those remote access points, because both criminals and nation states are adept at bypassing passwords.
Absolutely. And I've heard talk to you about certificates, which is sort of, I think, works the same way. You're talking a little bit about the tokens and passkeys and things like that, different ways of basically making it not only more secure, but also more user-friendly. I don't think anybody loves having dual-factor or multi-factor authentication hooked up when they got to log in. So that usability element of these approaches to credential security is also becoming more and more important. And I think it's as much cultural as it is technical when you talk about the solutions that are out there. Are these the things that you're seeing that have been most effective in helping companies guard those logins? Or are there other things maybe that we should be looking at as well?
I think it really is about the usability, and I think passkeys is going to be the winner here. I mean, I don't personally mind having a USB token plugged in. In fact, I have one right now plugged into my computer that I have to tap when I authenticate, because I always have my keys with me. But I hear a lot, when we see companies roll this stuff out, even that, a lot of folks are like, oh, I don't always have my keys with me, or my toddler's currently playing with them. Or, there's a million things, right? And so all of us always have this with us, it seems like these days. We've always got the phone. And so if we can use that as the biometric in our phone as our way of authenticating and not having to enter any digits, and not having to carry around our keys if we forgot them or we left them or our spouse borrowed them to take the car or whatever, maybe it seems to be the most frictionless, right? Because to be fair, when I use passkeys now to authenticate, and I use them quite often, I don't even have to enter a password. It's even better than it used to be, right? Like the usability is brilliant, and that my passkey is me unlocking the device and having its possession, something I have and something I am, if you will. That's my two factors. And that's brilliant. And in many cases, that's all you need. And in super high security cases, like in some of the things I do at Sophos where I have access to sensitive things, I have to do that, and I also have to enter a PIN. But it's very rare. It's only in the cases where I'm entering a highly secure system that I have to do that extra step. And that's the thing that companies should be looking at when it comes to that usability is which things in the network, just knowing your password or being on a company-owned device should be enough to get in. And there's certain things that are low security, just allow it. Only need the multi-factor when it's something more critical, perhaps. And a passkey where I just unlock my phone with my face might be good enough to get to 95% of the systems. But if it's something, if it really is controlling the nuclear core in the power plant, perhaps you have to have the physical thing plus a pin as well, just to be really sure it's you, and in that kind of situation. But you can kind of create this tiered system where you're only creating friction in the rare circumstance that you're doing something highly sensitive and get the friction out of the way for the rest of it.
No, it makes sense. And it's all about just making it as hard as possible for the hacker as well, to go through some of these different steps. And if you've got these different things in place, again, that your employees aren't stressed about, or it doesn't cause them a lot of issues or a lot of time, you're on the right track. Makes sense. Finally, let's hear from Extra Hop's Chad Lemaire as he dives into connectivity challenges and some of the non-standard elements of industrial control system architecture. We'll start the conversation where we start a lot of stuff when we talk about industrial and OT cybersecurity, and that's just visibility. I mean, I know it's a big part in what we've talked about before and what Extra Hop does. Why do you think, before we can get into detection and response and all the other cool stuff, why do you think visibility just continues to be such a challenge for manufacturers in the industrial sector?
Yeah, when it comes to OT, there's a diverse and aging infrastructure associated with a lot of their environments, with unique communication protocols. Standard networks, we're all familiar with the standard networks, but when it comes to some of the industrial networks, you have to deal with unique communication protocols. The other thing that we're seeing is an expanding attack surface within it. So environments are growing, but we have an incomplete asset inventory. And so all of those things together make it difficult to detect lateral movement throughout. And then recently, SANS released a report saying that there's just a scarcity of OT security expertise out there. So you combine it with a unique set of circumstances and individuals who aren't capable of handling and doing security. And that's where we end up and having that lack of visibility.
Yeah, it's interesting that the threat landscape is expanding, and part of that is our own doing. We're getting more connections. Right. We're having more things hooked up. Do you think we've gone too far with that? Is there too much stuff, especially being connected to the internet for remote access and third-party access? Have we gone too far there in trying to embrace a lot of these IoT-type technologies?
I don't know that I would call it going too far, but maybe it's going too far without a deliberate approach. And I think that's part of what we may need to bring into this is a deliberate approach for the IoT. I mean, the reality is that's where we're headed. It's all IoT. My refrigerator is IoT, right? Everything's going in that direction. It's a little scary for me, but we need, as long as we put in the proper security protocols, then we should be able to keep ourselves safe.
You talked about sort of the non-standard nature of these networks as well. It's very different than, say, an IT type setup, and we're always adding into it. There's also the legacy component. There's a lot of older stuff that we bring into the mix. What advice could you offer manufacturers in sort of trying to embrace a lot of the fact that it's not a standard approach, that it does take a little bit more customization, and really embrace that in order to have a better just network construction, I guess you could say, that's more security friendly?
Yeah, I think one of the issues we deal with in the OT space is, unlike a traditional network where we may be able to have some downtime, right, that's coordinated, that makes it easier to get after improving your network security or network architecture. It's extremely hard in the OT space to do that just based on what those systems are doing. And so I go back to my comment about the deliberate approach for IoT, there needs to be a deliberate approach to OT writ large when it comes to improving security and the architecture. I know it's going to be a little bit harder for the executives to make that decision, but the decision has to be made, or you subject yourself to having non-standard security, which adversaries, threat actors can take advantage of.
Thanks to the panel for their insights, and thank you for joining us today. Just a reminder that to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. For Max, John, Chester, and Chad, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.